part of a policy thing. Second question is for Ed. Okay, so we have this rise in inequality. Normally, you think the wealthy households have a higher saving propensity, so an increase in inequality should show up as a decline in consumption as a share of GDP. But as we probably are all aware, the U.S. trajectory has been increasing consumption as a share of GDP. So the question then is, whose consumption is driving that? Ed, you seem to think that it's more middle-class consumption financed by debt, borrowing from the savings of the wealthy. So I'm wondering if, in your data, what the wealth distribution looks like, because if that story is right, you should see the same patterns in income inequality then reflected in wealth inequality. You should see really massive increases in wealth inequality. So I'm wondering if that's in fact what you see.
Is that enough to start with? We'll say yes. We can. If we want to, does anyone want to begin answering questions? Otherwise, we'll just start with Tom at the end of the table and move down the line. Yeah, great.
Okay. Well, I do think that this, the first question, unsustainability versus instability, Alex. I think of the neoliberal model as unsustainable rather than unstable. So it enjoyed a growth of sorts that continued for 30 years, and there was a difference between consumption growth and underlying economic growth. But eventually it exhausted itself, and I don't see it necessarily collapsing. I mean, I think we could certainly just end up now in a period of very low growth or no growth. Now, there are conditions under which I do think it can collapse. I mean, I do think if the deleveraging is really extensive and continues, and I do think that sort of like we're in a situation now, the metaphor I used in an op-ed earlier was that debt is like stepping on the accelerator when you borrow, but in the meantime you're adding a little bit of concrete to your trunk, and so that slows you down eventually. Now, deleveraging is particularly bad because now you actually step on the brake while you've still got the concrete in your trunk, and so you can really slow down fast, and that's what's happened. Then I said that's why I think of a deep recession. Now the question is, does it go into a depression, which I can't imagine that happening. I used another metaphor here. If any of you are familiar with the Titanic, these are all boys' metaphors. The ship was supposedly unsinkable, except all the bulkheads had no tops to them. So when you took a long enough tear on the side of the ship, the front filled up and then the water started flowing overhead, over the bulkheads. And I think this is the danger in the US economy now. If we start to get a tremendous cutback, say, in state spending, and some of the other things start to collapse, and I'm worried here because I think a lot of the unemployment insurance, which is a very good automatic stabilizer, if you follow the numbers now, they start to fall off the cliff in the next 6 months. People have just exhausted them. So there are a number of reasons to think we could have a sort of Titanic effect kick in, and that's where the global economy kicks in a little bit. It's another piece of it. So, but my own prediction is that's probably not going to happen. I think it's certainly something that you should be watching for, and that would be a case of instability. More likely, I think we just kind of drop down, dead in the water. There's enough impulses in the economy to keep some sort of growth going. Now, there were a number of questions that I think were sort of related. So let me, change of paradigm, demand shortage. Yes, there is a demand shortage, and actually I'm sort of doing some presentations in Washington around about this now. I'm fed up with the stimulus debate, actually. I think it can be very misleading. If you're a Keynesian, you have the metaphor of pump priming, and that's what stimulus is. But pump priming only works if there's water in the well. And there's no water in the well. So I think we can keep on putting a little bit of Keynesian stimulus in, but it doesn't get sustainable growth at a faster rate because there isn't any there anymore. And so that's why we need to have, and I'm glad that Tom talked about this, sort of, we need a different type of, I like this, I think it's easy to do. Oh no, it's not so easy to do. Why am I not seeing normal? Let's see. Okay, well I can't work this machine, so let me just show you a little bit of a slide. No wonder I can't work it, it's so long. No. Here we go. Repack the box, I call it. I'd like to make it bigger. We want to put corporations and financial markets inside this box and take workers outside it. How do you repack it? You have a different type of globalization. We've all been thinking about that for a long time. We have a restoration of full employment, the macro policies that go with it, the monetary policies that go with it, the regulation that promotes it. We have what I call solidarity labor markets. We rebuild the labor market institutions that tied wages and productivity growth. We have what I call social democratic government, which is we sort of restore balance between government and market, regulation, public investment, the whole array of things. Actually, in a way, you have to think of it a little bit more than that. And this is a six-dimensional. A box is not four-dimensional, it's six-dimensional. And if you only had a four-dimensional box, it's quite weak. It collapses, actually. You sit on it, pop, it's down. There's some stuff supporting this on the side, and this is where the politics gets into it. This is where you have financial markets and corporations doing their job. They are driving the agenda that produces these four sides. And that's a very big problem for us, how to corral Wall Street, how to corral multinationals. And so there's a political dimension, and it has an economic governance dimension about it. How do we, that's where I think of the corporate agenda entering. That's where I think of the financial regulation agenda entering. It's not just the traditional Keynesian demand management piece of it. It's about power in the economy, making choices and seeing that the right choices get done. That's the stuff that's a bit more invisible, a little harder to get on the table. It doesn't always flow automatically out of our own economic theory, I think, but it certainly flows out of a political read on what the economy is. Thanks.
No, thank you for your questions and comments. There's a couple of very good ones. The first is, that was a good point made that if you remember back to my first graph, there was not only did inequality rise very rapidly till 1929, but there was a big fall off after 1929. So what's going to happen after the Great Recession? Well, I don't think that pattern is going to repeat. I think we've already seen a rise of inequality between 2007 and I project to 2009. I think what's different about, I'm not really an expert on the Great Depression, but I think what's different about now compared to then was that the rich really took a big hit during the Great Depression. Stock market collapse really affected them, and a lot of them, again, this is more in the way of speculation, but a lot of them, it was the rich who were the debtors in the 1920s. Remember, there was a lot of margin borrowing. People would buy stocks on margin. They put up 20% and effectively take out an 80% loan. So that so it's just the opposite during the Great Depression when the crisis started. It was the rich who took the hit. They were the ones who lost money, became bankrupt. I don't know what happened to housing prices during that period, but on the other hand, housing was not a very widespread asset during that period. So I think it was the rich who really got hurt more than the middle class or the poor, at least initially during the Great Depression. This crisis is different. I think it's the middle class who has the big debt, and they're the ones who are faltering. They're the ones who are going bankrupt. Big increase of the bankruptcy rate over the last year, 2 years. Foreclosure rate, of course, you all know, has skyrocketed. And just in terms of net equity, big collapse of wealth among the middle class. The rich were hurt certainly early on in the Great Recession, but now the stock market has pulled up again. Profitability seems to be expanding again. We hear about big bonuses being paid on Wall Street. That's sort of the tip of the iceberg, meaning that compensation of the rich is going up again. So I think we'll find for this recession that that inequality is going to go up, not down. And think the big difference is where the debt is located.